these founders actually need to be slightly unhinged.
All right, thanks for being on the panel this evening and also making it through the day. It was a long day for everyone, hot also. So I'm really excited, very diverse panel. Obviously, let's start with our investors in the group with a very easy question of what do investors look for in founders these days? Obviously, you know, deal flow is important. There are a lot of different VCs. You guys are also competing with one another. And you have your own niches. So just curious, like, what are the must-haves as a founder that come to you and pitch? So maybe, Phil, you can start.
It's a great question. It's an answer that changes with every pitch, I would argue. For me personally, I'm very junior in my career, so I've only seen so many pitches, but what I've seen as a recurring theme and what I've enjoyed has been a deep-seated sense of confidence in one's idea. The notion that what they're building is deeply disruptive and being able to communicate that effectively and concisely. Disruptive ideas are big in nature, but being able to synthesize them really effectively, to me, tells me that they know what they're doing and they're confident in doing it. Being personable is very important because as a founder, you have to be on stage eventually, like I am now, which can be scary. And also just deep dedication. I think, you know, the confidence I described as the first part of my answer is very nicely married to a tenacity and a drive. It never gets easier being a founder. So acknowledging that and wanting that, I think, is a superpower. Not many have it, but those who do are the ones that are most likely to go the farthest. So being able to sense that emotionally, energetically, from the get-go, to me, is always a sign that regardless of their idea, they're prepared to take something the farthest they can. So that's what I look for, at least.
Duncan, what do you think?
Okay, so all of that, plus, and by the way, so we invest in very early stage deep tech companies, so kind of slightly different focus to other investors, really looking a lot at the technology. But for me, literally everything you just said, plus one really important thing, which is like, these founders actually need to be slightly unhinged. And I often say that at places, people are like, haha, that's funny, what do you mean by that? You're just joking. No, I'm not, I'm dead serious. Like, it is really, really hard to build a hardware or a chemistry or any kind of disruptive technology. And anybody that does it has to be a little bit crazy. They have to look at the world through a different lens to everyone else and just not be satisfied with the way it is. They want to make a positive change. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for founders that have that bizarre drive that just will not stop. You shoot them with a tranquilizer, they will not go down, they will not go to sleep. You put a barrier up and they'll just figure out a way of getting around it because they've got that common goal, that mission that is not just good for them, but also good as a driving force for the whole company. And they'll be building a company around them. They need to have vision and execution within that company, but that vision is key importance because without that shared amongst the rest of the team, they're never going to succeed.
That's incredible advice, actually. Like, coming from Techstars, it's not only like a bit crazy, right, in a good way, but also just incredibly resilient. So Ben, how do you actually translate that in a pitch? The fact that you're a little bit crazy and unhinged and that you just won't stop.
Well, when you're getting ready to pitch, there's two things that you can focus on. What you're saying and how you're saying it. Content and delivery. And if that's your MO, right, that you're a little crazy, how can you make that known in a helpful way without maybe scaring people? But how can you make that intriguing? Or how can you use that content to your advantage? What's the story behind why you got to where you got? How did you get there? Why are you like this? If you can involve the story of yourself into your pitch, that can help reduce some of that, I think, liability of maybe being a little on the crazier side, and can be incredibly engaging. So, in a nutshell, lean on stories.
So I'm going to say something that's a bit taboo or like not so politically correct, but I advise a lot of founders myself, and when I do give that advice on like involve the VC and the investor in your story, a lot of the answers I get, especially from underrepresented founders and female founders, are like, oh, I'm not that interesting, or I don't have a story, or I don't know what to say. How do you actually build that up out of people and maybe the clients that you work with? And the question is actually valid for all of you on the panel. I give a lot of tough love to all my underrepresented founders in like building that up. How do you give that confidence? How do you help? And what's the advice to the people here, to build that? Because everybody has that moment. It's like, I'm not that interesting. And frankly, that was the answer I had when they invited me to be the MC, today. I was like, why me, right? And so what's the advice?
Well, the first thing I would say, and then I'll let other folks get on this question, which is a great question. Communication is physical art. If you've seen me in the other sessions, that's what I have been talking about all day. It's a physical exercise, a physical experience. If you're creating content about yourself or about your company, you gotta start by talking out loud. And luckily nowadays, voice-to-text software is great. So try something called out loud drafting, where you say stuff out loud, get it on text, and then you can edit it later. You can find the points that are engaging, that you're like, oh wow, that actually is an interesting part of my life. I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna use that as a point of focus. So that's where I would start.
And how do you get people to that point? Because even getting there to speaking out loud's hard.
The first thing I would try would be if you have a loved one who can ask questions to you, prompt you, that's a good place to start. A friend or family member, a co-founder, whatever it is. Get someone to talk with you out loud, and it'll be an easier exercise.
So a safe environment to start with.
If I could just tap in super quickly to that point, I think if you don't find your idea interesting, it may not be worth pursuing in the first place. But if you're obsessed with the idea, can't stop thinking about it, wake up thinking about it, try to problem solve around it, that creates that intensity, that sense of advocacy, and that's what becomes interesting to me as an investor, is when I sense that person across from me. It's almost as if they don't care if I'm me or you, it's just the fact that they are so desperate to express what they're excited about, what they're building, that they can't keep it in, and they are obsessive and they're kind of crazy. But that's what's interesting. You can be the coolest guy in the world and have a bad idea. I won't invest in your company. So I think it's creating or being confident in that sense of obsession with what you're building that'll tell you, hey, this is worth pursuing, and getting in front of people and sharing it with everyone else, because that's just what I find more interesting.
I actually have an example about that. There was demo day. It was a Techstars demo day, of course, 2 weeks ago at Tech Week, and there was this guy who was pitching, former vet. He actually got shot in the face, and so he had a speech impediment. But he was pitching at demo day, and so it was part of his story. And sometimes the idea can be great and can be so passionate, but talking about themselves is such a difficult thing to do. So I don't think it's a either or, it's more of an and. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Kat.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the idea of being interesting is completely overwhelming. That's such a big swath, and so not everybody can be all around interesting, but if you can pick one thing, your idea, how you got to building what you're building or what motivated you, that breaks it down into bite-sized pieces that then is easier to express.
And also, it kind of gives that storyline and, your thought process. This is what happened in my life, and this is why I had the idea, which then led to this, right? There's a bit of a timeline and time frame, so it just structures a little bit your pitch in a way, would you say?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So the fact that you kind of structure a little bit your thought process on why you created that company might also help structure the pitch.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the structure of it is essential. What happens to folks when they get into a high-pressure situation is it tends to come out like a fire hose of information. And I'm sure maybe if anyone's had a pitch that went wrong, right, that's kind of maybe what it felt like. So having that structure is not only freeing in that it can help make your story alive to people listening, but it also is a little bit more stability for yourself in that you can lean on that structure of how you got here, why you got here, where you want to go.
Thank you for that. So I have a question actually for the two of you. We have Kat obviously on the panel. How important is it for founders to come to you and say, hey, I have an advisory board and here are my advisors and I want them eventually, to have equity, et cetera. Like, how important is that? Does it make founders look more serious? I'm just curious to your opinions.
So we invest super early on, right? So we're normally people who have just come out of a postdoc or PhD, and they're really just an idea. They've got a dream. They haven't really got a company together at all. So at that stage, they probably don't have an advisory board. it is a crucial step in getting to the next stage of financing because it shows that not only can you get credibility and reach out to the right people in your industry, but you've also got someone there who can pick up a phone, who can talk about you in a way which is intelligible and is relevant to the particular area that your company is in. And people are going to continue to offer that support to you as you go through your life of a startup, not your whole life.
Hey, you never know.
So, I think like there's a particular need in certain industries to make sure you've got a solid advisory board. So if you're in healthcare, definitely making sure that you've got healthcare practitioners who are well known for their research and their practice within a key field is super important. In the industrial setting, I would say, honestly, less so. I admire founders more that have found other startups that have done something in the field to advise them, rather than having like the CEO of a top kind of industrial company there. That's not because I don't admire that particular person's credentials, just more that that person has had a different level of experience versus what a startup has done in that particular sector.
That makes a lot of sense. And you, Phil?
I actually also look for a diversity of experience and identity because I think sometimes, just this week I was pitched a company that had an entirely technical co-founding team, which is awesome for building something, but perhaps not as good for selling it. So if I see folks involved in the advisory capacity that are fulfilling needs of a company that the existing co-founders may not be able to service, I'm super excited because it's like, to me that tells me the founder A is self-aware and understands where their weaknesses lie and wants to improve them. But B is willing to be almost democratic in their approach to leading and managing the company and growing the company by understanding that like they can't do it all and that those voices in their diversity are very powerful and amplifying parts of the business that they just don't have the time for or don't have the skill set for. So exactly what you said on top of that diversity of experience as well.
Okay, I have a quick question for the audience. So we have founders here. Do you have an advisory board? I'm just curious. Yes? 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 Are you happy with your advisory board? Yeah? Okay. Good. So how do you actually support founders in building advisory boards? What are the conversations you've had with startups that don't have that advisory board, or actually that have an advisory board but want to either like change them out, add people? I'm just curious, like, to conversations you've had.
Yeah, so I mean, I loved hearing from you too, but we really advocate for founders building out their advisory boards because not only can you fill your knowledge and your skill gaps with advisors, but they can also be lead generators for you. So for instance, if you're a biotech, you might want to tap into an advisor that's in big pharma, or if you're an ed tech company, bringing on somebody to your advisory board that works in the university system could be a really great game changer for you. So thinking about it that way, we think it's a miss if you're not leveraging your advisory board, but it's important to know who you need when, because if you bring on advisors too early and you're not ready for them, you're going to give away equity that you shouldn't be giving away at that time. You need to make sure that you're making use of them. And advisors can also be angels. So bringing on advisors, making room for diverse advisors is a great way to diversify not only your advisory board, who you can then eventually maybe pull for your governing board, but also get diverse advisors on your cap table. So we love advisory boards.
So let's talk about diversity for a second, like in the team and advisory boards. Is that something that's important to you guys at the early stages? At what point in the growth stage does that become important, if at all? I'm just curious about that. Whoever wants to take it first.
I can grab this. So I actually work for Gaingels, and our focus in investing is offering underrepresented founders and investors a chance to access the top quartile VC. So from a business model perspective, we think about diversity very thoughtfully and constructively. But I think that sometimes we try to think of it not just diversity for diversity's sake, but making sure that the folks that you're bringing in are the right person for that position. We know in our hearts and through numbers that equitable and inclusive environments create better business outcomes. And so fostering a sense of inclusivity on a team makes for a more effective, efficient, harder working team. Gives folks a bigger voice, which they obviously all want. But of course, if you're two people in a garage and you're just starting, thinking about this diversity, constructively can be a challenge. So whenever you do it, first start with an inclusive culture, then come in with an open heart and a thoughtful process that makes sure that there is not just a room of your peers. So many founders I talk to are awesome, and then you look at their co-founding team and it's all their buddies from college, which there's nothing wrong with that, especially if they're the right people, but you got to be mindful that folks from other places will understand things that you may not and make for better products, better launches, better growth strategies, all that good stuff. And so thinking about it from day one in as constructive a way as it is possible, I think is super important for us as investors.
Yeah, I would just add to that like, obviously you've got an advisory board with a startup, and then you've also got a board of directors. Two different groups with different responsibilities, but both of those have a shared common goal of giving advice and help. And I would just say that if you start looking around at that room as it grows and grows, as you get more and more capital, and everybody looks a bit like you, maybe at different stages of your life, you're probably not getting the right advice that you could potentially get from people that don't look like you. And that goes from just everybody across every different industry. And so the more and more kind of diversity you can build into the people that are influencing your outcomes, the better influence you'll have, the more kind of open you'll be to different perspectives, and the likelihood is you'll be able to make better decisions.
So you just made a point, and I want to kind of get into it. It's like, what is the difference between the board of directors and board of advisors? Just to kind of make sure everybody knows.
Okay, so board of directors have a governance responsibility for the company. Advisors are there predominantly to do exactly that, to give advice in a particular topic. And you can have different types of advisories, boards for one company. You could have a clinical advisory board, you could have a go-to-market advisory board, you could have an ESG advisory board. But your board of directors are predominantly made up, hopefully, of the founders of the company, then your initial investors, and then you'll start to get external people on the board as you grow in size as a company. Aside from governance, they're there to also, they have one job really, which is they can fire the CEO. Or not, if it's the right thing to do. But that's the one thing they can do. They can fire the CEO or not. They can keep that CEO there. But they're there to act as basically a kind of a second tier of security for the rest of the investors and for the company as a whole. They are then also responsible for the financial auditing of the company. So when an audit is done, they will then typically have a board of directors. They'll then have an audit committee that will look at the financial stability of the company and make sure that all the correct measures have gone in to make sure that the company is not misusing funds.
Thank you for that, Kat.
Can I just add? Which is great.
Of course.
So the advisory board is really like almost functioning like subcontractors, right? And they're there to help you. They might even do some work for you in a very tactical way. They don't have a fiduciary duty. Governing boards do, and that's what you were talking about. But they're very strategic, right? They're there to make sure that the shareholders are, the strategy is set correctly, and they're not going to be nose in. So that thinking about it differently is they're two different functions, really.
Right.
And so a quick segue as well on communication. So I'm a former chief of staff, right? So I help Mael manage the board at Techstars, all that good stuff. And so those board meetings, a lot of preparation goes into that, and obviously very different type of company here. We're talking about founders. But managing a board is a lot of work and a lot of time, and it's also an art form. And being able to actually communicate in those board meetings as a founder, especially when you're not used to doing that, is really important. So I'm just curious, like, what are your 2 cents on that, specifically for board meetings?
Well, one thing that folks, even at the highest levels of any industry, don't do is practice. Practice out loud. Practice what you're going to say. And I know that sounds simple, but it's a very small investment, very high reward, just like warming up, like I said earlier. And having that practice in your body changes how you say something in the moment. So we often get lost in the idea that communication is only happening up here, especially in situations where you're sharing financial information or you're defending your record in front of the board, right? it's only happening up here and that should be enough. But in reality, it happens through your entire body. So if you're not communicating with your entire body, at least if you haven't practiced that way, then you're leaving a lot of cards on the table. And I can't necessarily speak to the dynamics between founders and boards in a very micro setting, but macro, that's kind of what I would always advise anyone, which is make sure it's a physical experience and practice.
That's great feedback, actually. So let's go back to the actual topic of the conversation. It's like, what are investors looking for? So we talked about potentially having a solid board of advisors, being able to defend and tell your story in a structured way, be practiced, etc. What else is on your kind of checklist, grid? Maybe like on a first call versus a second call, are you guys that structured in how you vet? I'm just curious about that.
For us, it's IP. So it's all about the intellectual property of the company. We're deep tech investors, so we're looking at something completely novel, a new science, something which we can see is achievable to get to a point at which it's able to get into the market. You know, we're taking risks. Whenever you're investing in something new, there's an undeniable unknown there, so sometimes we're wrong. But we want to see that we could at least envisage a path for that technology to get to a critical scale. We also want to know, and something we haven't really touched on yet, is like market understanding, insight. So a lot of the time we meet very technical founders that actually, really just know a huge amount about the technology and not much about the market in which it could create some impact. And that is often where we need to have either a conversation with them around, hey, you need to go and find out more about this, and we'll help you do that, or you need to get someone on your team who really understands this business. And in the industrial sector, and also in healthcare, but more in industrial, that really is a critically important piece, because the whole world's changing. Literally, we can feel it in the air at the moment, but then a lot of industries are starting to completely change the core technology of everything they do, and understanding all the nuts and bolts of how that's going to happen is super important for any company that has a technology that thinks they're going to disrupt that. So that's another one of the kind of areas that we focus on with the founders.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, there's a portco that I met at one of my events. They do sustainable cement,
right?
Something like that. And I'm like, wait a minute. So you have to know everything about the cement industry, which is incredibly specific, right? On top of knowing the technology. And so either having a co-founder that can do the GTM in the market and you're the technical person, and that's applicable to any industry, not just a healthcare or deep tech, I feel. I don't know, Phil,
right.
What you think. But.
And we don't want people that have read up about that. We want people that have gone and actually poured the concrete. We want people that have gone to the site who can actually talk with this exact same vocabulary as the people that are actually making the decisions about whether to use that particular concrete or another one.
So live and breathe, and also having their hands dirty in the market and have actually
right. Yeah.
pitched, sold. We have a pitch coach here. Actually, I'd be interested in a second. I'll ask what's the difference between pitching VCs and pitching a customer, kind of thing, if there is one. But for sure.
Yeah, just as an example, we do quite a lot in built environment. My favorite founders in built environment are general contractors themselves. They've actually worked doing this, and they really understand everything about the world they're going to spend the next 10 years in.
So the conviction.
First of all, completely agree. From our perspective, from the earlier stages, what I actually look for is as much validation as possible at your existing stage. And usually for me, that means some form of outlying data in your performance that tells me this isn't just a small business that could run on its own eventually and has well intentions. I'm looking for 2 to 3 times the average performance on a metric like retention, user growth, revenue generation, that tells me that there is something about this specific product that is exceptional and that can grow to the scale of an Uber, a Lyft, or whatever. I mean, we're in the business as VC investors of hitting home runs, not necessarily singles and doubles. And so when I see outlying performance, I get excited, and it separates the majority of existing startups, which are all, people work hard on them and they're great, but is there the potential for venture-backed scale? It's hard to see unless there's something that tells me that they are performing highly above other folks in their spaces. That to me is like, oh great, we had our first meeting. Let's talk with the partners. Like this is something that like needs more thought and attention than any new blanket statement AI company that wants to make sales more efficient. It's like that's really cool, but I know that exists already. So what about you specifically shows me that you're going to be able to grow to a $100 million in revenue business, for example?
So in America, it's a thing. You kind of position yourself among your competitors and actually say what's wrong with your competitors. It's not something we do in Europe. So I'm just curious, like, what your take is on that in pitches.
On
like bashing your competitors, basically.
Well, I don't know. I think it's maybe what kind of company you're trying to build or create. I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100%. It's a thing that you should always do, bash your competitors. I think maybe as your previous question, or you kind of threw it out there about what audience you're speaking to. I think that's probably the more important question: is who's your audience? Are they someone who wants to have that person who's able to say this competition is not so great, that's why you should go with us? Are they someone who wants to be more inclusive in terms of the market? Knowing the audience is a huge component of who you're talking to and why. How much detail? How much, where do you start in terms of the amount you're sharing? All that kind of stuff.
That's totally fair. It's actually at Texas, if you're kind of this company that puts X company and Y company and Z company and you're kind of mashed up, you're not a good investment. Because you can get eaten up alive by the big guys. I'm just curious as to what you think about that.
I think you asked a really, really good question there about how you differentiate. One of my pet peeves, and it's mostly just me, but I'm trying to like socialize this so everybody hates this as well.
I love pet peeves.
Because it's disgusting. It's so annoying. It's like I keep seeing founders that will draw like a 2x2, a chart with the X and the Y. And it'll go something like this every time. It'll be like less expensive, more expensive, like good, bad, or like small, big, whatever it is. And what they do is they then say like everything is crap over here and we're great over there. I'm like, you didn't need a 2x2 to show me that. A 2x2 should differentiate two positives either side and show me where there's an opportunity area here, not just there to show me that you're better than everyone else. That's not insightful at all. It's wasting my time. And it's also making you look like an idiot.
That's totally fair. Actually, I'm going to ask a question. Who has a 2x2 deck or slide
People
in
are
their
leaving
decks?
because of what I said.
Competitive matrices,
Yeah,
anyone?
We have 1, 2. You only have 2 founders that have that. Guys, you're missing that very
So
important.
2x2s are great as long as you're pulling apart two positives. You need to look at the axis and think, these are two, they don't even need to be positive, they just need to be differentiation. Distributed versus, or like, geographical focus here versus there. Whatever it is, it can't be a good versus bad, expensive versus cheap, fast versus slow.
So just a next level into Jumanji game of like value, right?
I just want people to think about it as giving insight into the market and to show a blue ocean versus a red ocean. That's the point of those, not to show that you're better than that. Okay, I'm done. I hope.
No, can I pile on for a
Phil
second?
Phil is
Can I
going to
pile
add
on?
some stuff. I love this.
I sometimes see index these competitive matrices where it's like a categorization of like feature sets and then like the checks or the X's.
What do you think of those?
I oftentimes think they're pretty dumb because everything's an apple to an orange in a competitive space. Sometimes it's valuable for core principles of a product.
Right.
But even then, I feel like it's most often misleading because they're not thinking about all the other check marks their competitors do have against them.
Exactly. Same thing. It's like when you get like 6 green ticks and then all the rest are red crosses for everyone else. You didn't need to use that framework. But if you can show where there are positives in others and where there are positives for you, I think you end up being more insightful and helping investors to make decisions.
Yeah, the focus of that slide should be how you're defensible, basically, vis-a-vis that.
I don't know. I kind of disagree. Is that okay?
Please. It's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
I come from marketing, so it's more like you don't want to lie, and you don't want to go, I'm going to say this with love because I am American. It's a bit American. It's like, we're the best, right? No, it's like a bit realistic, right? And like, oh, we're missing this, but, we can compete with this,
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Kat, you were going to say something.
No, I was just saying I'm learning so much.
You're also fundraising, so it's kind of
Yes,
exciting.
we are.
So I have another question. I had this founder ask this to me, saying, hey, can I prove traction, very early stage, right? Can I prove traction with LOIs? Is that good enough?
Yes.
And how many is a good number?
As many as you can get.
Or from who?
That's for sure. But like, in your mind, I come to you, I have like X LOIs.
Yeah. I mean, like, so the problem is for deep tech is you can never really show anything beyond an LOI, really. So what you can do is show a well-structured LOI. So a well-structured LOI basically says, okay, we agree, non-binding, that if they hit certain criteria on this, then we are interested to purchase or to do a pilot. And then you go into details of what the pilot or the purchase would be. And then if bonus points, at the end you say, here are the success criteria for that pilot. If it then achieves those criteria, we would be interested in a commercial agreement.
Okay, fair.
I think it's super dependent upon space. You know, the life science, biotech, et cetera, those are such long timelines and there's so much technical risk that an LOI to me at an early stage says, oh wow, industry experts that are going to be eventual customers want this already. And that's a huge signal. So as you say, as many as you can. If you're like an enterprise B2B SaaS company and you've got some LOIs, I'll need a bit more validation on what the context of that is, what the scale of that LOI is before I feel comfortable equating that almost to like revenue generation, for example. I think it's dependent upon what industry you're in, but if it's more consumer, like software, maybe not.
And obviously you can leverage your advisory board to get LOIs, right?
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
You can get your advisory board to help you to get those LOIs.
Oh, absolutely. And I was just going to ask the question, like, does it also matter, like, who the LOI is from?
Yes.
Unfortunately,
Fortune
yes.
50 company would be great, but like you can't always get there. I mean, you know, it's really hard for hard tech startups to do this, but that's a good thing, right? So an LOI from a big corporate actually is quite difficult to get through their legal department. And so there has to be somebody, and investors know that, so there has to be somebody driving that from within, which says that there's a product market fit there, or a technology fit, and that is a really positive sign for investors. Just the fact that they can navigate through that.
Yeah, I think we've seen a few founders in our community exercise that, you know, bring on advisors that then can turn into like a business pilot or an LOI. It's really beneficial.
I think a more macro concept here is like the stamp of approval from like folks in the space. Like when we're at the early stages, if you have some really cool enterprise logo on your deck, maybe it's a little markety, but like it gets me excited. Like an LOI from a Fortune 50, as you're mentioning, signals strong intent from the industry you're looking to target. That people will purchase this, will be interested in it. You know, if you're a consumer startup and you're working with Target or Walmart, it's like, oh wow, okay. Clearly there's something there because the biggest investor are interested in working with you at that stage. So anything you can find that captures that sense of institutional rubber stamping and approval will definitely serve you in getting folks excited.
So here's a dumb question. I'm a first-time founder. That's not the truth, but I'm just role-playing here. I'm a first-time founder, and I have this customer. How do I get LOI? Like, do I work with a lawyer to kind of draft that? Yeah? So we have lawyers in the room, right?
Yes.
We have a lawyer in the room that I know of. Who are the lawyers? We have one. Okay, so that's that person if you want to get LOIs written. There you go. What are the other metrics then that are super important? LOI is great. What else? I'm just curious. Like,
if you're a tech startup, user base, like the scale of that, I think is pretty valuable. The retention rates of that user base also tell you how valuable the product is to its users.
I have a question about that.
What's up?
I have a question about that just for a second. So I have, for instance, a Techstars founder that comes to me that says, hey, I have 10,000 users of my thing for free. So it's not a paid community yet. They didn't quite get to their paying customer. Is that too soon to pitch you guys?
Nothing is too early for us in this theme of early stage investing.
So how can you prove that they can actually like convert?
I think you'd have to go beyond the scale of the user base and understand the actual usage statistics around it. Like, are people clicking on the service? Even if they're free, are they actually using it? Are they staying on it after a week? there's a certain guiding principle that Facebook used when they were growing really, really quickly that gives you an idea of like what outlying performance can be from like a percentage growth week over week number. Anyways,
We're getting a bit specific, but because that's literally what the founders are looking at. It's like, what are the KPIs I'm going to put in my deck that's actually going to prove that I have something here, although I don't have paying customers yet, right? So.
yeah, anything that tells me that people want to use your products, whatever data that is that you think it is, like please show it to me, and I'd love to hear why you think that's the case. That's the pitch.
I guess that's part of what Ben, would structure in a way, and that's part of the pitch. Is like you have this 20, 30 KPI list, and it's just picking the 5 or however many that make the most sense, right?
Yeah, I would say that, like we talked about stories and how that's important. Having data, having hard data in there is also a way to switch up your content, right? And again, I can't tell you what kind of data you need to show, but content variety is key, right? So if you had a statistic, counter it with a story. If you've got something very detailed, counter it with something very succinct. If you've got something that is generally known, say something that's really surprising, right? So how can you switch up the content in that way and share what you need to share?
To your quick point of like, there is like a list of 25 recurring KPIs across businesses. Whichever one specifically to your company you think best indicates success, put those on the deck. If you're not making money, you don't have to put a traction slide that says we're not making money yet. You don't have to say that. Rather, I'd prefer you focus on, let's say, exceptional day 30 usage or amazing click-through rates, whatever, again, that like basically creates this sense of individuality in your concept, I think to me is more interesting than feeling like you have to put a slide about traction or user base or whatnot.
I would also just add, if they're coming to your platform or your tool to do what you want them to do and they're finding value out of it, you can figure out how to monetize it later because they're doing what you want them to do.
That totally makes sense. Anything you'd like to add, Duncan?
I mean, we're really weird compared to other. Like, this is normal. Like, this is exactly what most investors will want to see. The type of data that we look for. I mean, so there's the next steps from the LOI, right? So there's the pilots. If you can get a pilot, fantastic. And if you can get feedback from the pilot, and you can get an investor to speak to the company that's doing the pilot, that's even better. But before that, like really early stage, like to your point about what data can you show for us, we ask for a thing called a TEA, so techno-economic analysis. It basically just shows here are the different variables of the technology that we're investing in, and here are the outcomes of those different variables. And so you can like tweak things, be it energy cost, be it like chemical usage, whatever it is, and you can kind of find where the sweet spot is, where you could invest a minimal amount of money and get something which is hopefully break even. That's another thing that we look for.
I want to kind of, before we run out of time, also emphasize a little bit on the IP aspect that you mentioned. Why? Because it's not just applicable to deep tech and health tech, although obviously it drives a lot of the stuff. I had recently a founder call me up saying, oh, I don't have the rights to my own website. So something as basic as that, to kind of trademark everything everywhere that you think you're going to reach out. Again, we have lawyers in the room to do that stuff, but it's just a kind, gentle reminder to get that really buttoned up in order to be able to defend it with VCs, because you're going to look bad otherwise.
Can I add something?
Please, Kat, go ahead.
We highly recommend somebody with legal background on your advisory board to help you think about all of those things.
For sure. So another thing that I wanted to kind of mention before we ran out of time, I had a founder stalk the hell out of me, and he actually got me on his advisory board. He did incredible, textiles company. How do you actually recommend pitching people to get on their advisory? Because they're busy people, right? And so, of course, you have people that are board ready, that want board seats, are looking for it actively, etc. But you have people like me that just, are busy, and I just don't have time to coach like 12 founders, which I do anyways. But anyway, just curious, how do you kind of like deal with that? And Ben, if you have any tips and tricks to kind of convince people that don't want to be convinced, I'd be curious.
I mean, I think it's similar to investors. It's relationship building. It's making sure that they're, mission aligned. It's creating, and understanding and going out. I mean, they also very much want to know who else is going to sit on the advisory board, and they want to be amongst friends on the advisory. Like, so it's you got to use your charm, you got to persuade. It's creating a relationship. But
Ben, what would you say?
In those moments,
sometimes you don't have that relationship. You're just a random person that's a speaker coming off stage, and you're going to pitch yourself at that speaker saying, can you be on my advisory board? And there's no relationship. So how do you kind of...
have a few different versions ready. I would suggest, as in many industries, you've all heard the term elevator pitch. What's your 30-second pitch? What's your 10-second pitch? What's your 3-minute long pitch? What's your 5-minute long pitch? How can you moderate or modulate what's needed in that moment? And in those moments where you're like, oh, I've got an opportunity right here, how can you focus on the things that you can do in the moment instead of how you're feeling internally, right? How can you project confidence without actually maybe not feeling it in the moment? Things like eye contact, vocal variety, making sure that you are standing at the full length of your height, right? All those things you can do in the moment can help in those moments that are highly pressurized where you can make an impression.
And I would just add understanding, so it's part of getting to know them, like what drives them. So are you going after them for a skill, and they're maybe interested in changing careers, so coming with you, then that would give them an opportunity to build out another piece of their career. Or, it's understanding what drives them. Because ultimately, as a startup founder, you know that you're high risk. And so why is this person going to take on and give time and energy to a high-risk enterprise?
That's totally fair. The way he got me was just relentless. Like, he sent me 10 messages on LinkedIn until I answered. So anything else you guys would like to add before we wrap up?
Quick thought that I had while we were talking about IP that I didn't get out.
Yeah.
For what you're investing in, absolutely. Sometimes, though, if you're focusing on protecting your technology, you may actually be inhibiting its organic adoption in the marketplace. And so I encourage anyone who has something that's really cool to think about, does this need to have a concrete fence and wall over it, or is it better if it's in the hands of 1 million people as quickly as possible? It's case by case, but don't be trapped in this mindset of, I have to protect before I can go out, because you may slow down and may lose ground to other folks thinking about the same thing you are. You just don't know it.
Totally fair statement. Thank you to all of you to pull this panel together a little last minute. So I'm very grateful, and I had a great time. Hopefully you did too. Thank you all for listening in, and hopefully it was interesting. Obviously, come find them after. I'm sure they'll be interested in listening to your pitches and giving you advice as well. So.